Since I last spoke to Syrian-American groups in June, Russia and China issued a third veto to block a resolution in the United Nations to pressure the Assad regime to stop its violence and to implement Kofi Annan's six-point plan. I have to be honest with you, we made a very sincere and we made a very hard effort to convince the Russians and to convince the Chinese to work with us. The Russians claim they do not support Assad personally, but our experience is that they block every effort to implement pressure on Assad and his regime. And so, as Ambassador Rice warned Russia and China before the third veto, we are now going to stop working with the United Nations on Syria, and now we will work outside the framework of the United Nations. And so I want to describe to you today what are the steps that we are taking now. Please remember, our goal has not changed, but we are adjusting our strategies. Secretary Clinton highlighted when she was at the Friends of Syria conference in Paris at the beginning of July, she highlighted that we are working on 3 lines. First, we're increasing the pressure that we can apply ourselves to the United States. So, for example, you will have noticed additional American sanctions against people in the regime over the last 2 months, as well as organizations such as, for example, this is an example only, we issued sanctions on the Syrian-Islamic Bank, the Bank of Islam in Syria. Why did we do that? Because we have discovered from our own information that this bank was involved in helping people in the regime hide their money. So I'm also happy to say that after we, the Americans, did that, European and Arab countries did the same thing. They followed our lead. We recently hosted here in Washington a meeting of about 24 nations from Europe, from the Middle East, from Asia. It's within the Friends of Syria group. And we discussed about how to better trade information, about how the regime is hiding its money, and about how the regime is trying to escape sanctions. We know the Syrian government is suffering from these sanctions policies. And with all respect, to my friend Mahmoud, the sanctions are having a big impact. For example, we know that the government is running out of money. And we know that now the Syrian army is actually suffering from a shortage of supplies in some locations because the government doesn't have money. The Russians sell weapons only for cash. We know that the Syrian army is running out of supplies because defectors are telling us that. And it is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but it is one of the reasons that the morale of the Syrian army is dropping. Now, there are others in Syria who had been supporting the Syrian government and are now quitting that support. For example, the business communities in Damascus and Aleppo. They have suffered greatly from the violence. Factories have closed. Some of the big companies now are nearly bankrupt. In some cases, they are bankrupt. And family members of some of the important business families have been arrested and are now in jail because they joined the opposition, or their families have fled Syria. Some of them are in Dubai, some of them are in Beirut, some of them are here in the United States. More business people and more people in the army would quit the government and quit supporting the government, but they are afraid for the safety of their families. We hear from many people in the army, and even people in the Syrian government, that they would join the opposition, except that they are afraid for the safety of their families in Syria. It is as if President Assad is holding a country hostage. People are waiting for the day that he will go. Getting ready for that day, the day he will go, is extremely important. As Zaki mentioned, I worked in Iraq for 4 years, and we saw that in Iraq, if the political opposition is not ready, you can have a terrible, you can have a tragic situation. And so, as Secretary Clinton said in Paris, we are also working on another line, the line of our support to the Syrian opposition. We are doing it in many ways. You have heard about how we are helping local opposition groups inside Syria with communications equipment. We have sent into Syria now about 1,000 different kinds of communications equipment, about 1,000 pieces. Many of the YouTube videos that you watch, many of the live television broadcasts that you see on Arabic television, when you see Mubasharatan min Dakhil Syria, on the Al Jazeera Mubashara or on Al Arabiya Mubashara, many of those broadcasts and many of the conversations between people inside Syria in the opposition, those things happen only because of the stuff that we are sending in and the training we are giving people to use this very sophisticated equipment. It's not just a cell phone, because we don't want the Mukhabarat to listen to the conversations, and we don't want them to find out where the people are. So we have provided about 1,000 pieces of these equipment, and we're sending in more every week. Now, I'm not going to give you more details. I think this audience, and you who have family in Syria, or you who have lived in Syria, you know better than anyone what it is like to live in Syria with the Mukhabarat. But you can see on the internet every day the results of our help. And likewise, we have started sharing experience with local activists from around Syria, from the west, from the north, from the east, Deir ez-Zor, Al-Kamal, Hasake, and from the south, especially Dara. We're talking to activists about how to do organizing, how to do networking, not just in their town, but across Syria. New methods of organizing communities, and in effective new ways of challenging the regime. We have also worked intensely with regional and European partners to help the Syrian national political opposition to think about how to build a new Syrian state step by step. We strongly support a Syrian plan that was announced at the Arab League conference in early July that would take Syria from a police state, a Dawla Istiqlaliya, a state that had no liberties, and a state that does not respect dignity, and instead take Syria to a state where human rights of all Syrians, and I must say all Syrians, regardless of ethnic or religious background, and where they can live in safety and justice and equality.